Absolute pleasure to be here. Thomas, thank you for joining me. So yes, Thomas is one of my students. I wreak havoc having contact with our young leaders of tomorrow. And so today what we're going to do is just go through, I'm going to use the deck as a guide. And about halfway through, Thomas is going to pop in and he's going to walk through how we've endeavored to incorporate, to identify natural assets, get them into the asset inventory, do a bit of a condition assessment, knowing that this is the beginning of this process of identifying natural assets, as well as bringing in climate change. And yes, certainly from a planner's perspective. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. All right, ready? Everybody can see?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, there we go. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, and it's going to be ever so, I'm just going to do the flyover, right? So, and it's a great pleasure actually to come right after Erin Orr and her team, because this very much builds on it, and actually I'm going to borrow a couple of stuff from there. So we're going to look briefly at climate change projections, only because this is the focus, and I'm sure you've had a bit of that already. Shared language, community resilience, action planning, storytelling, and then the takeaways. So we've all seen these, right? And basically what this tells you, when we bring in the climate lens, is generally for here in Metro Van, this is what this tells us, is that we're going to have warmer temperatures, decrease in snowpack, longer dry spells in summer months, more precipitation in the fall, winter, and spring, as well as intense extreme events. We're seeing it across Canada. The only difference for Metro Vancouver is most of our precipitation falls unfrozen. Just a lot of rain. So shared language, I always try and do this for every process, because often the folly amongst humans is we're using the same words, but they mean differently, and we don't have a shared understanding. So for that, and to that end, in terms of resilience, when we say resilience, I loan it from the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. So resilience is the capacity of social, economic, and environmental systems to cope with a hazardous event or trend or disturbance, responding, reorganizing in ways that maintain their essential function, identity, and structure, while also maintaining the capacity for adaptation, learning, and transformation. That's a really good definition, because it links resilience with the capacity to adapt, where adaptive capacity refers to the resilience that reflects learning, flexibility to experiment, and adopt novel solutions, so think pilot projects, and the development of a generalized response to a broad classes of challenges, such as emergency preparedness. There's a broad class that you learn and you train for, but it's to apply to a number of things. So what does that mean for community resilience? So urban and so it is the sustained ability of a community to utilize available resources, to respond to withstand, and then recover from adverse situations while continuing to deliver important community services. That's the catch. That's resilient communities. While continuing to deliver important community services. That's where we seem to, where things fall down a bit. So with the changing climate, natural hazards may increase in frequency, duration, and level of impact. That's bringing in that lens. The exposure of people, property, and other community assets, so the systems, to natural hazards can result in disasters, depending upon the impact. So the type and severity of impacts are based on the extent of the hazard and the vulnerability of the community's assets, where we build them, think planning, as well as the community's ability to mitigate, prepare for, respond to, and recover from events. That is the community's level of resiliency. And of course, we are up against some amazing challenges. We have aging and failing infrastructure across Canada, in fact, around the world. We have urban growth because humans continue to co-create, so we got to continue to build structures in which to service and provide for. And then we bring in that climate lens, right? The changing climate. Holy smokes. And I'm with you, Erin. I think asset management framework is the ideal framework in which to work within in building. So we have to remember that green and climate-friendly technology is important, but absolutely insufficient to making societies resilient. So we need to move, expand our focus from mitigation to include adaptation. I know mitigation is sexy, technology, investment, etc., but we need to adapt. So the point of this one is to also emphasize when we talk about resiliency, we're talking about sustainability. So I have to ask, in terms of costs, when you take a look at the left, and of course the highlighted one is the year of the perfect storms across Canada in 2017 that cost us immensely. But always remember, that's 30% of the actual costs. The rest are Canadians are covering it. So every decision we make, every decision our politicians make, and government is us, it's costing us out of our pocket, directly and indirectly. So it is obviously that in the long run, it's nearly always less challenging and less expensive to build resilience into the planning and design prior to development, rather than as a response to a major event. So very much what Aaron Orr was bringing to the fore. But how do we do this? Because that's what we keep hearing as planners, especially from councils, is, oh yeah, but we don't know how to do that. We don't have enough data. We don't, it's always that, oh, push it out, push it out. No. There are ways of doing it. And we just saw that. And of course, there's many studies out there talking about if we invest front end proactively, we save money. We see $1 to $6, $1 to $7, $1 to $4, but the bottom line is we save money. So questions to ask with resiliency in mind: have we incorporated climate projection into all aspects of our planning, design, and development? Have we considered natural assets and the ecosystem services provided in our planning, design, and development? And with that, I would like to bring in Thomas Knopf, one of my students. He stepped up. I happened to mention after talking to Chris Chen, and he was just like, you know what? I think I would like to do that. So the assignment is, as we mentioned, every student pick the place in their community, neighborhood, or region, identify natural assets, and then flex that knowledge, putting into the asset inventory. So take her away, Thomas.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, pleasure to meet you all, and thank you so much for having me today. My name is Thomas, and yes, I'm one of Christine's many lucky students to be able to participate in this term project. So today I just wanted to show you a little snippet of the ongoing work that myself and my classmates are doing. Right now, as you can see with the high-tech in-depth map in front of you. This is the map of the community I chose, my very own hometown of Pemberton Heights. It's a small neighborhood in North Vancouver. And I've already highlighted a bunch of engineered and natural assets worth considering. But today, if Christine, could you highlight with the cursor over to the yes, to the east, I wanted to focus on one in particular, that is the McKay Creek watershed and the McKay Creek greenbelt surrounding it. So what's significant about this asset? For that, I'd like to pull up the natural asset inventory. If you could please, Christine.
Absolutely. Show all windows. Sorry, buddy. I did have everything lined up. I really did. All right, here we go. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. All right, so if I could direct you to the highlighted row in question, that is the McKay Creek watershed. So when I'm talking about the natural assets, there's several questions have to come in mind. So for example, what services does this asset provide? For example, the McKay Creek watershed is a habitat for many marine wildlife. It's a backup drinking water source for the surrounding community in case of emergencies. There's also it also provides stormwater management and flood mitigation, and a host of other services as well. The commission date, this is more of a question for engineered assets. In case of natural assets like the watershed, it's been here longer than we have, so it doesn't have a commission date. Some other questions that come to mind are the appraised value of the asset. This is something that should be considered for the natural asset action plan, because to date, there hasn't been an economic analysis of these natural assets, which just goes to show how important it is that we start considering them as important assets for our communities and treat them as such. Moving on from the appraised value of it, what revenue does this bring to the community? Again, this is something that needs to be assessed in an asset management plan, but undoubtedly it attracts a lot of tourists to visit the area with its many networks of trails and lovely parks. Just being in green space with clean air also prevents a whole host of costs because it helps people's physical and mental well-being. So that's the services that this asset provides, but what condition is it in? And for that, Christine, could you please pull up the conditions assessment for the natural asset? Thank you.
Absolutely, buddy. Take her away.
Okay, again, looking towards the McKay Creek watershed, several aspects of it come to mind. The location, it's the same coordinates as the McKay Creek Park that surrounds it, but I can tell you more about the McKay Creek itself. It's about 8 kilometers in length, starting from the base of Grouse Mountain, and it flows all the way to the Shipyards District in North Vancouver. So it's quite a sizable creek. The current age of the creek is unknown, as it has been here for longer than we have, and but what I can say about the expected useful life, this is an unknown that we have more control over, because depending on how we treat it now and how we manage it in the future, will really determine the useful life of this creek and how much and for how long it can keep serving the communities. As for the conditions of the creek itself, it is it is one that's been under a lot of service and restoration in recent years, especially the forest surrounding it. Currently, it suffers from, as long as I remember, it's been suffering from outbreaks of English ivy and Himalayan blackberry, two nasty invasive species. And to give you an idea of how nasty they are, since 2013, over 16 tons of invasive species have been removed from the area. And yeah, as such, it is considered a highly endangered natural asset due to the impacts of not only the invasive species, but the incredible urbanization and development that surrounds both sides of this ecosystem. And for that, I listed it as high priority, even higher than the Creek Park itself, because while the Creek Park does suffer more immediate effects of the invasive species, it is being managed by the Parks Management Board, whereas the McKay Creek watershed demands more attention. And yeah, that brings me through the little run through of natural assets. And thank you very much.
Yay. Thanks, Thomas. Turn on slideshow. All right. Gotta get this baby out of here. All right. So, oh, sorry. Okay, here we are. All right. So, and the final one, have we ensured service redundancies? And this was spoken about at the last session. In our planning, design, and development, because in terms of resiliency, sometimes it's just redundancies, having that extra pump on hand, right? And the one thing as a planner that I really stress, and that is keep the human nature, how we are wired. So everybody's always like, I want change, let's do change. And they're like, okay, who wants to change? Oh, look at that navel. Right? And we all look at our neighbors. We all do it because change is challenging, right? We know what we know what we do, and we do it. So I always incorporate that. There's going to be resistance to change. So let's mitigate for that right at the outset. So planning is planning is planning is planning. Asset management planning, heritage planning, land use planning, community planning, official community planning, et cetera, et cetera. It is step 1 to 7, basically. Initiate the process or the project, however you do that, however you scoped it out. Articulate and assess the baseline, right? Bring in all that data, everything that's relevant to the scope, including, and this is where we pull in the climate projections. Then we identify and prioritize hazards, risks, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. No matter what you're planning, it's basically risk assessment and management, right? And opportunities. Carpe diem, right? In every plan, that is basically what we're doing, the essence of it. We develop and prioritize resilient strategies, however that looks, finalize and share the plan, implement plan, and step 7, where we always fall down as humans, monitor, evaluate, and adjust ongoing. Please, can we do more of that? So There are tons of tools out there to do this. There really is. As Erin highlighted, as well as other people have highlighted before, the one that I tend to highlight is the one that's for planners, is that's, step 1 to 7 idea. So it's the community resilience building. These are the steps towards it. They go into a much deeper dive, but basically it's prepare. So you establish your working group goals, terms of reference, communicate and engage. Number 2 or B, characterize your hazards, right? And there's a number of tools in which to do that. So past, current, and foreign impact, future impacts, determining highest priority. So this is where you do a lot of your assessments, right? You bring in that baseline data. Identify community vulnerabilities and strengths. So through infrastructural, societal, and environmental vulnerabilities and strengths, including your natural assets. Identify and prioritize community actions, including infrastructural, societal, and environmental. Then determine the overall priority actions. We can't do it all, right? So often we'll isolate 5 top priorities. And a lot of times we even bring in, is it fundable in terms of how we identify? Because there's no point setting up a community to be discouraged because you couldn't actually do what you're setting up to do. As well as, and then putting it all together. Generating the action plan, however that looks. Strategy, budget, capital plan, whatever it is, it's an action plan, right? And then you implement. So it really is a basic process that we adapt to every part of what we're doing going ahead. And in fact, project management, you could say the same thing. So include, the foundations, the steps that we just went through, as well as tell the story. So what we find is folks, they're not connecting with us, right? So this was Preston Manning. Evidence alone means nothing. We need to tell the story. In broaching climate change with the public, don't start by making scientific declarations to people who rarely read or think about science. Far better to start with the climate change effects our audience is already aware of, particularly in resource producing areas, which is across Canada, and then present the science to help explain it. For example, start with a logger's awareness that winters are no longer cold enough to kill the pine beetle. That's across, especially Western Canada. And oil drill crews, awareness that taking longer for the muskeg to freeze will allow drilling each fall, and actually spring breakup happens sooner and fall happens later. What is that? Economic impacts, family impacts, right? Huge impacts. So tell the human story, not the scientific one. Listeners and readers must relate to the information on climate change to their daily lives, their real life stories, right? And we hear that all the time. So I could go, climate projections indicate an increase in duration and intensity of drought. Our street and park trees are dying due to the stress from increase in drought. Fires within the community are becoming more common. We're worried about the future due to the increase of drought. People are like, oh yeah, no, I've been noticing that too, versus climate projections. Anyways, carry on, Christine. Tell the story. Climate projections indicate a decrease in annual precipitation, potentially impacting softscape areas, urban green space, versus our community parks and street trees have an estimated value of $22,000 each. Wow, that's a lot of money invested in our trees and green space. Let's work together to ensure we can continue to rely on our trees and green space. Yes, we're all in this together. Tell the story. So takeaways, final part. Engage your planner early and often. We can block inadvertently everything you're doing by policy and otherwise. So we, registered professional planners, RPPs, are the precursor to all things human development by way of community planning, land use planning, economic development planning, asset management planning, heritage planning, social planning, parks planning. Except these are assets that we are planning for. And the process needs to be in concert with all relevant asset management and planning personnel. Otherwise, we could block you without even knowing it. So for example, thank you, Chris Chen, for this one. Engaging planners early and often is to include them at the core asset management steering committees. That would be awesome. Not only that, pooling resources, folks. So basically, this is my takeaway. Community planning, asset management planning, community resilience, they all work together. They are the same framework. We just bring in all these other different attributes, scopes, what have you. But the bottom line is, it's the same process. We need to be doing this as a collaborative group. So my final one is for the planners. RPP should consider asset management planning to be a community planning framework whereby effective and tangible outcomes in the community planning process can be realized by way of utilizing the asset management planning framework. Because as you know, Good governance is equal to transparency, accountability, and equity. And good governance can be clearly illustrated via a comprehensive community asset management planning. You see how I did that, hey? Community planning, asset management, bring it together. One, it should be one. Because then we can justify, we can show how everything we do in planning is backed up by the asset management plan, because right now that isn't the case. So there we go. Changing climate protection, shared language, community resilience action planning, storytelling, and takeaway.